Welcome everyone to the Decisions webinar on automating your processes with the ChatGPT module. So this will be larger than just ChatGPT. There's a lot going on with that I'll talk about. You can think about it in terms of large language models. But before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. First, some introductions. I'm Gordon Jones, the COO of Decisions, and I've got 4 colleagues with me today and who'll be presenting: Blake, Denisha, Derek, and Josiah. So we've got 3 different use cases. I'll introduce that in a little later, but there's 5 of us here today. First, I'd like to plug a couple of training events that we have coming up. First, we call our training events Submerse or Deep Dive Training. We have in early August, 8th through the 10th in Denver, actually Golden, Colorado, just outside Denver. We have a great event at the Table Mountain Events Center. It's right near the Coors Brewery, and something tells me we might even have a tour at the end of the training. So if you're new to Decisions or old to Decisions and want to brush up, please join us out there in Denver, August 8th to 10th. And if you're busy that week or taking some PTO, join us later that month in Sydney, Australia, where we're doing the same thing, the 29th through the 31st. So at these trainings, we have 2 tracks. We have a beginner's track, and then we have a masterclass series. So again, whether you're new to Decisions or experienced, you'll learn something either way. Also, some upcoming webinars. Later this month, we have a webinar on accelerating your use cases. Our solutions team builds a lot of different things that help people accelerate and get started faster on the things they're trying to build. And then in July, we have a webinar on no code with a human touch. So how to meet end user needs. So all of this can be found on our website. So decisions.com/events. You can sign up for any of the trainings. You can sign up for these webinars. And I'd highly recommend you go and put them all in your calendar as far as they're scheduled. Then you can book the time. All right, and then finally, if you have any questions throughout the day, drop it into the chat, drop it into the Q&A section. We'll either answer as we go, or we'll certainly pick it up at the end. So just if you have a question, by all means, bring it out and we'll get to it. Okay, what's the agenda for today? I'm going to do just a brief intro, 3 minutes tops, to what Decisions is and what we're all about. Then I'm going to talk a bit about these large language models. I think we've seen ChatGPT take off. In particular, a lot of the conversations we have in sales with companies and prospects, we're hearing that they've been told to implement 2 use cases with these large language models, and I've heard nothing like this in years with a new technology. Been playing with it a ton myself. I've subscribed to the $20 a month version with ChatGPT, and really in my 40-year work history, this is truly one of these transformational technologies. And Decisions, being a no-code software development platform, is actually ideally suited to automate processes that involve going back and forth with these large language models. And I think we've got 3 use cases that are interesting, and we'll show that very well. First, we're going to do a brief intro. If you have Decisions, we'll show you how to get the module, how to install it, and that just takes a few minutes. And then we've got three demos that we're going to share with you today. The first is test data generation. And anytime you build anything, you have to test it. And oftentimes coming up with data is difficult. ChatGPT is excellent at that. Whether it's 5, 10, 100, or 1,000 rows of data, you can generate that for your application and test things out. We have another example from our professional services team. And that first example, Venetia and Blake will be presenting that. The second example on user stories and acceptance criteria. With Decisions, we are a software development platform. So you have to go through the same kind of scoping, requirements gathering that you would to build anything. And as part of that, ChatGPT is excellent at developing, massaging user stories, developing acceptance criteria. And Josiah has built this into an application within Decisions to save it in a format that we use internally in our own internal system. And so we'll show you how that works. And then finally, Derek will present a deep dive into taking transcripts from the demos that we conduct with our clients, pulling that transcript, sending it back and forth to ChatGPT to gather information on the questions that people ask, for example, so that we can train our team to better answer these questions moving forward. So there's a lot we can do with this information, and we'll show you that. And again, any questions along the way, just drop it in either of those two places. So first, what is Decisions? Decisions is a no-code software development platform with a rule engine, a workflow engine, integration engine, and some UI tools. And it's completely no code. There's 3 use cases that we generally get involved in regularly. The first of these is a rule engine and decisioning application. And we're an enterprise class rules engine. We run billions of transactions a day, literally, in areas like medical claims, insurance underwriting, loan underwriting. And the whole idea here is to take this logic out of stored procedures, out of custom code, and put it in a graphical interface that's easy to update, change, create by the people who know the business. This is use case number 1. The second and probably most common use case, and the one that we're actually going to talk about a lot today, is orchestration, process orchestration. So it's taking data and integrating with various systems, running logic in between, connecting them, and engaging end users when necessary. The third use case is basically building out a full end-to-end application. We have a number of clients for which we've built out, full end-to-end, including all of the UI, and we're very good at that. So again, we're a no-code software development platform. Our chief value proposition is that we can build complex software quickly, and you'll see 3 examples of that here today. All right, so I'm going to do a bit about large language models. In 2 months, everything I say today will be obsolete. This area is moving very quickly. Every other day, there's new releases. So it's a good time to start playing with these things. I'll give you a high-level explanation of what's going on here. So we've probably all played with ChatGPT, and these ChatGPT is what they call a foundation model, and they've built this with a lot of big data, with this reinforcement learning, with human feedback, to build this language model that people interact with. So when you're asking questions, you're interacting with that. Now, what they've started to do is add their own little modules, right? And other companies, ourselves included, are starting to play with this, where we're taking internal data, we're embedding this. The process is called either tokenization or creating vectors, right? And these vectors are what these models run off of, speak to. It's the language that they understand. So now moving forward, you can not only ask questions of the large language model, feeding it data back and forth, but you can also enhance that with your own internal data. And I think there's going to be a lot of work going on in this area moving forward. And this whole thing exploded, I think, when ChatGPT released version 3.5 late last fall. And then again, I think it was April or May where they released version 4. So why now? Actually, a lot of things came together. There's tons of data and cloud computing out there, but the high performance GPUs that were actually built for video gaming turn out to be excellent for running these kinds of models. There's this transformer architecture that came out in 2017 that made all this possible, along with some other changes. And then there at the bottom is a boatload of money. So these things, to train these things, we're talking huge numbers of GPUs and data, and it all just came together in the past year to make all this possible. So you're also going to hear a lot about, closed and open large language models. OpenAI is the most famous right now, but Google, Microsoft, a company called Anthropic, Amazon, Facebook or Meta, the Baidu, the couple of Chinese companies are coming out with these large language models that are, where they basically control the, how the whole thing works. But there's also a bunch of open models. You see some of them listed here that are open source. So you can go to like huggingface.co and download and access a lot of these open source models. One that was released, I don't see it, it's not on my list here, recently by the government in Abu Dhabi. It's a very strong model built off of Llama that's been updated. So again, a lot happening here. So you could not only use the public models, but there's going to be a lot of private models that you could download and link to your own internal data. The other thing I'll point out is that there's tons of companies now springing up that are going to focus in very specific areas. It might be legal contracts. There's a lot of tools, a couple of which we've started to use internally on copywriting or creating content. But there's tools related to coding, development tools, chatbots, and again, this whole area is going to explode. And then underneath that, you've got infrastructure layers. You have a lot of companies that are going to help everybody build their own, access their own data. And here at Decisions, we're no different. We plan to make it easy for our clients to do these things in a no-code way. So we've started with our OpenAI module, which you'll see today. But we plan to expand that, and for the most popular, look to create easy ways for our clients to incorporate this technology. So one final note here. There's some use cases that make sense, and we're all about automation at Decisions, and a couple of the use cases you'll see here are probably good use cases, but there's others. If it's a one-off and you just need to go to ChatGPT, there's no reason to do it with Decisions. However, if you find yourself with Word documents where you're copying and pasting the same prompt into ChatGPT and changing it, maybe that's a good process for some automation with Decisions. So with that, that's the background. And at this point, I'm going to let Derek describe, where to find the ChatGPT module, how to download it, how to get it working, and then we'll jump into our 3 example use cases.
Thank you, Gordon. Yeah, so what you're seeing here is our Decisions portal. So as an admin, you would have access to our settings folder, which you can see in the far left icon. From there, you would go to administration and features. These are all of our available modules for download. And you can see in the bottom right corner, we have our most recent edition, OpenAI. You're able to click install from there, and just give a heads up, everyone has access to this module as we speak. It's available within version 8. So if you're able to do this now, you would be able to see this module. So by clicking install, it would take a couple seconds, and then now it's available for use. So a couple additional things to add on to that. After the module has been installed, you would backtrack a little bit and go to that settings folder. And you can see at the bottom, there's a new option, OpenAI settings. You would right click this edit the settings, and then there'd be a pop-up form that comes up. There is a link that you could copy and paste into your browser, which will redirect you to openai.com. And if you do not have an account, you could sign up. It's free, and I believe you get $5 free of credit. You would create a new secret key, you can see in the screenshot above, in which you would copy that key, paste it into decisions, and then hit save. Now, from here, your steps will now be available for use. Going into our workflow designer, you can see on the left, we have our step catalog. It contains thousands of steps within here. The first thing you would do is go to integration, and then from there you would see OpenAI. There's about 11 different steps that come with this module after you install it. For the most part, majority of the people would be using the create chat completion. It's the same experience as you would if you were to go to the browser. So with that step dragged in, you can see there's a couple settings, input options that you have. First, you have the chat model itself. So this is the ChatGPT model. There's a couple options available here, and it's really dependent on your account. So if you have access to ChatGPT 4, you would be able to use that within decisions. There's two inputs that are required for the step. One's the message. This is the prompt. This is where you ask the specific questions to ChatGPT. And then there's another option to clear that conversation. So you're able to continue a conversation exactly like you would in a browser. So if you had a process where, you asked it a question and you need to do a follow-up question, you're able to continue that directly within our workflow designer. If not, you could clear it completely.
Right, and it's easy as that. So you just download, install the module, put your ChatGPT key, and then the steps are there within the graphical design tools, and you can drag and drop and build what you want. So the first use case that we've built out here is this test generation use case. Again, Venetia and Blake will present that, followed by Josiah with the user stories, and then back to Derek with the transcripts from our demo example. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Venetia.
Thanks, Gordon.
Right. I think we can kick things off from here. So hello, everybody. My name is Blake. I'm joined here by Venetia, and I'm really excited to talk about something cool that we've built in Decisions today. As Gordon mentioned, we've got 3 use cases to show you, with ours being a good introduction to what's possible using our OpenAI module. We decided to build something that can actually leverage inside our own organization. So like a lot of software companies do, I imagine, we here at Decisions keep our sales data at home in the Salesforce platform. We built up a mock dashboard here in Decisions because we need to do some additional transformations to our Salesforce data. So we might need to run it through a workflow, evaluate permissions, change fields on the data in some way, otherwise manipulate it. And in order to build these processes out, we have a challenge. So we can't exactly test our transformations out on live production data. We're going to need some test data. In order to build these processes, we kind of have a couple of options to get our test data. Number one is that we can go out to a trade show and knock on some doors and shake some hands and get some real data, but that kind of defeats the point. The other option, which is a lot more time efficient, is to leverage our new OpenAI module to build some of that test data out for us. So we're going to see how to do that in just a moment. But first, I'd like to pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about how we actually built this workflow and what each step does. With that, our pilot Venetia here will move us over. All right, looking good. So first, we're going to select any data type in Decisions, whether it's a data type you created yourself or something native to Decisions. Once we've got that, we're going to select the batch size of the data that we want ChatGPT to generate for us. So that's the second step we can see. Now, as we're passing in this information, what Decisions is doing in the background is it's creating a prompt. it will then display the prompt for the user in order for us to kind of check it out and see if it needs any human intervention, any TLC before we send it on its way. Once the prompt is sent, ChatGPT works its magic and builds out our data set. After that, we're given another preview of the raw response that's going to be published as our new test data. And here we have another opportunity as the humans driving this process to intervene if we need to. So we'll take a look at that data, we make sure it looks good, and finally, we'll have the option to publish that data for decisions to use. So broadly speaking, that's how the build works in a nutshell. The initial version of this deployment was, I would say, probably an afternoon of work, nothing more than that. And most of the time was spent getting the prompt into a rock solid format. We'll see that as a theme here. So with that, let's go ahead and kick things off in the flow. Venetia, whenever you're ready.
All right, let's start with the test data generation.
Perfect. So the first thing we're going to choose is the data type we're creating the test data for. And Venetia, for that, are we limited to just the native data types and decisions?
No, we can have any type of data types. In fact, you can create your own type of set of sample data, which you want to generate as a test data and start making wonders around that. So this is just an example of leads, but I know there are a lot of audience who come from different verticals, different industries. So you can have, maybe if you are from human resources, you can have employee records as your sample test data. If you are from finance, you can have mock accounts information. So it's all up to you on how you want to play the data with.
All right, that's good intel to have. Let's go ahead and select lead just for the purposes of this demonstration. And what do we think for the number of test data? You want to do 8 or a round number like 10?
Let's go with 10.
All
because
right.
we have 100 plus participants. So
Good
let's
deal.
go with 10. And here we go.
All right, so we have the opportunity to check really quickly, make sure that this prompt is sensical. This is what's generated by the flow inside decisions. And once we're happy with this, we can go ahead and send it on its way to OpenAI.
And the nice
And this
thing
is-
is, go ahead.
I was
Gordon.
just going to say, these prompts take a little bit of work. If you've played with ChatGPT, you've got to test them out. And okay, and that little delay there was ChatGPT generating the data for you.
That's great intel. Yeah, some quick tips while we kind of get this in order is you might be familiar with the fact that it can produce data in a tabular format like this, but you can also ask it to produce data in formats like CSV and JSON. And with plugins, you can get even more creative. You can have it create, for example, a Jupyter notebook in Python, or give you advanced visualizations in the Wolfram Alpha plugin. But we'll keep it within the scope of the demo for now. All right, Venetia, did you have the chance to eyeball this data, make sure it looks good?
This looks good.
Good
Great,
deal.
Let's go.
Let's go ahead and publish.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And now we return to our dashboard here. And we can see we started with 36 pieces of data, and now we have 46 pieces of data total to go ahead and run our tests on. So we're using decisions to parse this data, and then we're allowing our dashboards, our workflows, our business rules to transform this data in a way that decisions does best. So with that in mind, we can integrate closely with OpenAI to get some quick test data rolling in your own personal projects. And how else, Venetia, have you used this sample data in your sales engineering role?
Yeah, in regular world, I see this can be used with any departments, not only just with the sales engineering. Maybe if I'm working on a workflow and I want to test the workflow, so I can just generate these test data and plug it as part of a unit test, which Decisions already has. So you can just automate these testings with the sample data that has been generated. And you can have reportings around those sample data that has been generated and see how your workflow has evaluated. So the options are limitless.
Absolutely. I think the next evolution of this project, should we have some more time to work on it, would be to get this embedded into our unit testing suite. That said, this was kind of the opening salvo. We wanted to start small and simple with the use cases and really iterated it upward and outward from there. So you'll see in our next use cases, it can get fairly complex and exponentially more useful to larger parts of the organization. If this was interesting to you and you want to take a closer look at what we built, I'm working with our partners here at Decisions to figure out what the best way to get these things published out are, and you'll receive an update on that. Hopefully you'll be able to take a closer look soon. With that, thank you very much for your time, and I'll pass it over to Josiah for our next use case.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Josiah Ilgen-Fritz. I work on our solutions architecture team here at Decisions. And the use case that I'm going to be talking about today is automating one of the parts of my job that I do on a regular basis. As we meet with our customers and gather requirements for the projects that we're going to build, we put together an artifact called a requirements traceability matrix, or RTM. And that outlines at a high level the requirements, the business requirements, and then breaks those down into user stories and further then into actual tasks that we can give to a developer to build. Those items all need acceptance criteria so that we can say, here's a user story, here's how we know that that user story is complete and ready to go. And so as we're writing those, it's a very manual process. And we started initially using ChatGPT to write our acceptance criteria. And we found that the time that it saves is offset by the time that it takes to format the request to ChatGPT, paste it into the browser, wait for a response, get a response, take that response, format it into the format that we need for our output, and then put it into our documentation. So I started putting together a project that will allow us to automate writing out those acceptance criteria and formatting them the way that we need to. So we're going to kick off the process here. And the first thing that we're going to do is give some background for ChatGPT so that it knows what we want to write requirements about. So let's say we want to put together a bakery operations guide, and we're going to give it some background about what we're trying to do here. And the more background that we give it, the more detail that we give it, the better ChatGPT is going to be able to give us acceptance criteria. So as I'm doing this in a real use case, I would be giving this as much information as I can to make sure that ChatGPT has very detailed information about what my project is and how it needs to work. Now I've got an overview of what my project is, and I can see my requirements to start stacking up here. I've already got one in here. That's some default items that I'm going to put into each of these documents that I write. I'm going to now say generate a new requirement, and it's going to say what is the specific details about this feature. So I want a process sending out monthly bills to clients, and the user of this feature is going to be my accounting team. I'm going to tell it to generate, and this is now going to send a prompt to ChatGPT that's going to include the specific feature I'm working on, who it's for, and the larger background that I've already given it at the start. So we'll give ChatGPT a minute here to think about my request. And once that's done, it's going to give it back to me, and it's going to say, here is this requirement. So we want a process for sending out monthly bills. Here's the acceptance criteria for that overall requirement. I should have an efficient and accurate process. Clients should get their bills in a monthly or a timely manner every month. It should be easy to follow. It should be flexible enough to allow for customization. So the more detail I give it, the more detail it's going to be able to give me in the acceptance criteria. And then it's going to say, for that requirement, here's some user stories. I want to create a billing template. I want to automate the billing process, and I want to monitor the billing cycle. And here is acceptance criteria for each of those user stories. Now, this form, I can come in here and modify this if ChatGPT gives me something back that's close to what I want, but I need to tweak it just a little bit. I can do that here. If I need to, I can go back to ChatGPT and say, hey, go ahead and filter this and give me something a little bit more tailored, so I can tweak that request just a little bit as I need to. Once I'm happy with what it's given me here, I'll go ahead and add it. Once I've got it added here, I can see now that it's there. I can go back and modify it. I can add additional requirements. And so I can use this to build up my documentation. Once that's done, I've got a button here. I can download it, and it will take all of that data and push it into the format that I need for the documentation that I deliver. So what does that actually look like built in Decisions? I'll go ahead and open up my flow here. I've got a couple things that are going on. The first thing is that input data. I've got a couple steps here that are around setting up some of the pre-formatted tasks that I want to include in every process that I deliver. Over here is where I really start getting into the ChatGPT piece of this. And so I'll open that up and take a look. And in here, I've got my form where I say, input the requirement, the specific requirements that I want to use. Here's where I go and talk to ChatGPT. And here's what that request looks like. I tell ChatGPT, here's what I want. I want a requirement name, description, acceptance criteria. Each requirement has user stories. Those have a name, description, and acceptance criteria. I'm going to give it the project name, the background, and the details. And here's a list of users. And then finally, I tell it that I want it in a specific JSON format so that when it comes back, I can actually take that and automate what I'm doing with that data. So I've got some steps in here to take that data and push it into defined decisions data types. I've got some handling in here if ChatGPT doesn't give it back in the format that I want, because sometimes being that large language model, sometimes it gives it back in its own format. We've got some ways in here for us to manually take the raw response and put it in ourselves. But finally, we format all of that data, and then we take it and we put it into the form so we can display that to the user, where this is all mapped to the decisions data types that are built around our expected results from that data. And so,
yeah, I think this is a good point when you look at all that's involved in formatting the data before you send it and reformatting it when you get it back. There's a lot involved in that, and when you look to automate something, you can see all that's involved here with the process that Josiah has built. Josiah, one more thing. Could you open up the prompt that you're sending?
absolutely.
I think this is a great point here. You can, if you look at this prompt, the 3 areas, 3 or 4 that have boxes around them, that's like the live data that he's pulling in from the form. The rest of it is the prompt that I'm sure he had to play with that prompt over time to get it to basically return the results. So some of this is probably manual until you find the prompt that you want. And once you have that nailed, then you can automate it in a process like this.
Exactly. This took a lot of playing around with sending multiple requests to ChatGPT to figure out exactly how to give it back the data that I wanted and in the format that I wanted. All right, so with that, we'll turn things back over to Gordon and Derek for the last use case.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Josiah. I'm going to share my screen really quick. So for the final use case, what we're kind of illustrating here is our demo where we actually pulled transaction data from Gong. We use decisions in an ETL process where we have decisions call Gong. We pull the transcript data. We pass that to an external database such as Snowflake.
Let me just interject here and set the table a little bit. If you're not familiar with Gong, it's kind of like Zoom. It's they record meetings and they create AI generated transcripts of everybody talking during the meeting. And what we wanted to do was to pull those transcripts, get a summary, also understand the questions that get asked, and then we can select 10, 20, 30, 50 of these demos, pull all the questions that get asked from our prospects and categorize them such that we understand what are the kinds of questions that people are asking us, such that we can train our salespeople, our sales engineers, our business development reps. So that was our use case in looking at this. And funny enough, since we've built all this out, I think a day or 2 ago, Gong came out with a similar feature within their own tool. We played out, we tested it a little bit, but what we wanted to do was very specific for training our own people. and then also save it into Salesforce. So Derek is going to walk through the process. And as you can see, there's a lot of back and forth. So we're pulling, there's an ETL process, grabbing data from Gong, sending it to this, to a database. Then we're grabbing it from the database, sending it to ChatGPT to summarize, to pull out all the questions, right? And then we want to grab all of the questions, categorize them, eliminate duplicates, such that we have this list of categorized questions that is common questions that are asked, during our demos. So you can see that with that, there's a lot of back and forth. For each one of these, there's formatting, data juggling, and Decisions is a great platform for doing all of that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I appreciate it, Gordon. So like Gordon said, Gong's a revenue intelligence platform. Essentially, Gong has a bot that will go into our meetings that records the transcript, and we're able to get additional analytics out of that. But everything's stored within the Gong platform itself. So really, this is like two pieces of the full project. The first part is that ETL process where we're using decisions to make an API call to Gong, get in that information about the call, the transcript itself. We pull it back into decisions. We transform it into a known object. And from there, we pass it into our external database, which is Snowflake. So first, I'm going to show what that process looks like. I'm going to actually get out of this view for a second. So navigating over to the decisions platform, this is my workflow where we actually use to pull that information directly for Gong. So first, we have to kind of format the information to send. It's really based on dates. We make that API call to extract the call details, the transcript itself. And finally, or secondly, we transform it into a CSV document. So we use Snowflake as our external database. It's a very powerful database, which it consumes CSV documents. You have millions of rows. Snowflake will consume it in a matter of seconds. So we transform that data. So Gong spits out JSON. We put it into a CSV. From there, we'll upload it directly to Snowflake. So we upload the file. We tell which table to go to within the database. It extracts that information. So typical ETL process, we have this on a schedule where it runs daily. Every day it'll go and get all the details from yesterday. It's kind of going back over here. So that's really the very first part of it. So we have all this data stored in our database now. What do we do with it? Like Gordon said, Gong does have a feature like this, but there's definitely a wealth of information that's available at our fingertips. And there's just so much we could do with it. We wanted to be able to extract specific details out of these transcripts, again, to understand what questions are being asked internally, externally, to help train our sales folks. And once we have this information, we're able to store it directly back in Snowflake, but we could also automatically update Salesforce. So really that second piece of it, I'm going to show you an example of a transcript we chose to run through ChatGPT, and I'll show you what it looks like on all ends. So hopping over, this is an example of a transcript. So when Gong is on one of our demos, one of our first appointments, if it's being recorded, we have the ability to produce a transcript as such. So it has the specific conversations going back and forth. And depending on how long these demos are, you could have a massive transcript. So as a sales director, or even the person that hosted this meeting, going through this is a nightmare. No one's going to do it as well. So we wanted to take this transcript, pull specific information. One, we wanted to summarize the whole meeting itself. Secondly, we wanted to pull key takeaways, identify any next steps, and then finally ask what questions were asked. So navigating to Salesforce, this is kind of what the end result looks like within our Salesforce environment. You can see that there was a demo that occurred within the past week, and we were able to get a summary of the meeting itself, identify those key takeaways. Typically, people would like to read a bullet point versus a very long paragraph. So that's kind of the purpose here. And then finally, identify any next steps that were conducted during this demo. So this is a great way for, the person that hosted, the account executive, even our sales leaders to come in directly to this view. They stay in Salesforce. They have all the information available for them. So how does this work, right? So there's a lot to it, and we kind of went from the transcript directly to Salesforce. I'm going to go into our workflow designer and show you kind of how all of this works today. So there's a couple ways this could happen. We could trigger this on when a meeting is completed. Right when the meeting is completed, we could call Gong, we can get the transcripts, and then we can run it through ChatGPT and then update the information right away. So Salesforce could trigger this workflow, but we could also have it on a specific schedule. So the first thing is, we're connecting with our external database. So we have the ability to do so directly through decisions. I'm able to create a SQL statement to extract any meetings that have occurred recently or by specific, by a specific ID. From there, it could return multiple results. If it returns more than one result, more than one meeting, it will be passing the steps where it will run everything in parallel. So if 5 meetings occurred, we would batch all 5, and it would hit this step, run all 5 at the same time to reduce processing time. So jumping into the workflow, this is just a little bit of error handling in case ChatGPT doesn't want to work for us. But really the first thing is for each call, the first step is we're getting that transcript so that we have a separate table in Snowflake that contains the transcript for that call. So we first pull that information out. We define our prompt. So, as everyone, Josiah, Gordon, were talking about, even Blake and Venetia, defining the prompts typically the very most important thing. So for us to get a summary of the meeting, we define a specific output. So we want the results in JSON. Secondly, we ask it for 2 points. We want it to summarize, very concise. We want it to identify any next steps. And then we just reinforce all of that information. Working with ChatGPT, it'll spit out the right results one day, 2 hours later, it's completely separate. So you have to kind of play around with the prompts to get them right. And I think after a little bit of trial and error, this one's working pretty well. So the first thing is, transcripts are very large. Like the transcript I was just showing you, it probably had thousands of words on it. There are limitations with ChatGPT's models. They only accept a certain amount of tokens. So tokens like the amount of characters that you pass in. So in this example, we try to run it through ChatGPT where we pass in that prompt with the transcript itself. So you can see we already predefined this information. If it fails, say it's too large, we're able to truncate it. So I split the transcript up into sections, let it run individually. And then once it finally produces that output, summarize the whole thing as a whole. So this is really helpful, especially with some of the limitations you may hit with ChatGPT. You almost need some type of process to handle this. So I'm sure some people have experienced that as well. So once it produces that output, that summary, you have to extract it, you have to clean it, you have to make it understandable. So we were able to define a data type here, which is a JSON object. We tell what it should look like. So if it fails, say that ChatGPT does not give us the expected output, we could rerun it through ChatGPT. And like I was showing earlier, if we can continue that previous conversation. And every time that I've run this through trial and error, if it fails the first time, the second time it typically always works. So it's something to keep in mind. You have to have some type of error handling here. From there, we could extract external, internal conversations, figure out the questions asked and such and so forth. And then what we wanted to do is after ChatGPT was able to get all of this information, we want to send it back to Salesforce so it's available for everyone to see. In here, you can see we make a couple additional API calls. First, we clean the data. You always have to clean it, make sure it's understandable by Salesforce. We create that summary record, and then what we do is we update the event so we can create that relationship. So jumping back to Salesforce, this is all that summary information, and then we also created that. After this was created, we created the relationship between the two. So now they're visible together. And then just the last thing I want to show, we have so many meetings that occur every month. We want our sales leaders to know what's going on, how these meetings are going. So we're able to send an email response directly to the people that conducted the meeting, as well as maybe their manager as well. So finally, with all that information, we could have decisions send an email where it will provide details about the meeting itself with that summary as we saw, the key takeaways, next steps, and provide links directly to Salesforce. This is very powerful. This is a very nice process. And we're at the point where after a meeting is completed, this information can be triggered right away from Salesforce, have it completely automated with all the errors handled as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Derek. And I think, what you've just shown speaks to the platform, right? You see a lot of integrations here to Salesforce, to ChatGPT, to Snowflake, and a lot of logic and data handling in between. So again, I think we're make for an excellent platform for doing this kind of thing, right? So as part of an overall process, business processes often cross application boundaries, and that's where decisions fits well, sitting between various applications, various services, running business logic in between. And with ChatGPT, there's just, this was 3 examples today, but there's a ton more for automating things, right? And if you'd like to see this in more detail or deep dive into any one of these use cases that we showed, please reach back or reach us at sales@decisions.com. We'd be happy to set up a demo to deep dive, answer questions that you have, brainstorm ways that you could utilize decisions for your own processes. Just to summarize before we get to some of the questions, this is still early days, right? So there's a whole, I mentioned there's a whole lot of models. Every week something new is happening. It's a good time to experiment, test, try things before, but it's not too late. Like I said, it's very early days. I talked to the value of Decisions platform for quickly putting these things into production. Josiah, just a question, how long did the application that you built that creates those user stories and the test criteria, how long did you spend putting that together?
Probably 10 hours between building and tweaking the ChatGPT prompts.
All right. And Derek, your use case, I know there was a lot to that and it went through a number of iterations, but how much time in total do you think you've spent on that?
Probably no more than a whole week, about 40 hours in total. There's a couple components. Salesforce, very smooth. But to be honest, it was probably a little less time than that. Just trial and error, going back and forth, trying to fix those errors.
Yeah, and again, I think this speaks to our key value proposition, which is our platform allows you to build this complex stuff quickly. I do want to jump to some of the questions. I think there were some good ones here. We had a question up front about why we only used 10 rows of data. Could we have put 100 or 500 or 1,000? And the answer is yes, we could have. There's no limitation in Decisions or ChatGPT. It takes a lot longer when you're asking for 1,000 rows of data. So for the sake of time, we showed 10. But for testing, you're right. You want to use a lot of data to test applications at scale. So
can generate large data sets using ChatGPT. We had another, here's a very important question. As a financial customer, I would like to make sure, when I'm migrating to decisions, I don't want production data to be compromised. What's the thought process using ChatGPT and the values available, to generate data? So, couple points there, right? When you're using the interface, the web interface with ChatGPT, unless you're paying and you've turned off the data save, they can use your data to train the model itself. So you certainly don't want to be training ChatGPT on very sensitive information, right? Now, building applications like we are, sending data via the API, they do not use API data to train the model, and they say they only keep it for 30 days in case they're if people are doing nefarious things, they want to have evidence that it wasn't them that did that, right? So, but again, there's lots of options. So there's going to be a lot of data that you don't even want to risk sending to some of these large language models right now. So there's going to be a lot of private models, and all of these companies, AWS, Google, OpenAI, they're all going to be coming out with very specialized models and methods for keeping corporate data safe. So it's early days. We're starting to see some of these announcements, but and we're talking to these vendors as well, because we want to make this process as easy as possible for our customers and incorporate as much as we can into the tool. We won't be building our own secret model. However, we likely will be building a model to make it easier for people building in decisions, answering common questions. So again, yeah, I wouldn't be sharing super sensitive data today, but each of these companies is coming out with secure methods to build your own private models. Any other questions?
Hey, Gordon, I've seen a couple questions about, can we use ChatGPT to build workflows within decisions?
Okay, so not at the moment. Decisions, ChatGPT doesn't know about decisions steps. Not to say we won't be working on something in the future, but currently not at this time. Let's see, do we have any? Yeah, there's a couple of people that have pointed out that, yes, some of these like Microsoft, AWS are coming out with secure endpoints to do this kind of thing. So it is possible, and for sure, the big players will be coming out with secure methods for transferring data. So we'll have 10 more seconds for any other question to come up. And if you think of one later that we haven't addressed or you'd like to ask, again, by all means, please reach out to us, sales@decisions.com. We'd be happy to set up a demo and a deep dive, and we hope you got some value out of this webinar today. Thanks, everybody.